Alternatively, we could listen to instruction from others, and their words would generate meaning within the perceiving loop, and we might carry out actions. We could, in fact, attempt to maximize the utility or happiness of the group as a whole. That is what Jeremy Bentham, the facilitator philosopher, wanted to do. But we've just missed an important point. What is it in the mind that prevents us from exceeding our budget? It is perceiver strategy that prevents this. As it is accessed through the thinking loop and operating as part of judging and conscience. And if perceiver analysis will not do the job, then the task of imposing budgetary discipline reverts to right hemisphere mercy thought with its feeling circuit. Emil Durkheim speaks of this as a move from restitutive to punitive law. I'd like to perhaps make one comment about this. If the mind is forced to revert to feeling in order to enforce a contract, then we notice that perceiving can no longer operate as an independent circuit. That's because feeling causes data to flow from FL to CL, rather than in the opposite CL to FL direction, as occurs during thinking. However, it is possible for perceiving and feeling to operate together as a hybrid circuit. I call this loop value. We notice several things. First, CL in value is no longer taking a stand on its being, and thus both kinship and Dasein begin to break up. This will affect the social order. Second, communication is not going to be as effective, for meaning cannot resonate properly within perceiving. Speech, in particular, will become less logical. Third, being will begin to center around mercy identification, which senses characteristics of objects in the external physical world. Retribution for those who violate contract will thus involve personal acts of violence against the external physical body of the perpetrator. He will be hanged in public, drawn and quartered, burned in hot oil, or have his hands cut off. The value loop, when it is used to enforce contract in this way, can easily turn into a vengeance circuit. Okay, let's move back to our topic and examine Dasein itself in its role as an economics machine. Let's suppose that CL is hungry, and CR, in response, develops a plan for baking bread. The right hemisphere and its CR are spatial, and the elements or objects of the CR plan will therefore link together into a spatial sequence, as we might perhaps present them in a workflow chart. This information is passed to the left hemisphere. CL can now choose to release from grayness the first element in preparation for implementation. This CL choice, as it passes from one element to the next in the CR developed plan, will alter right hemisphere CR space into left hemisphere CL time. What happens now? Martin Heidegger indicates that CL, as it prepares for the first step of making the bread, will reach out the hand automatically and unthinkingly for flour, under the assumption that it is ready to hand. This reaching out will be one of the habits that are located within the contingency loop. CL will assume, in its absorbed coping, that the flour is present. However, let us suppose that the flour bin is empty. Someone has used flour while we were gone and we didn't know about it. The flour will now become unready to hand. CL in response will release the grayness that covered the flour bin, and the mind will become aware of the flour. In particular, it will see that the flour bin is empty. Flour, in our current context, is a for making bread entity. That is its essence, and now it is too scarce. If our action context had been something else, then the mind wouldn't have noticed. However, things have now been brought to its attention. In a similar way, we might never notice the windows in a room until it became too hot, at which time we would look around for some way to cool things down, and might perhaps glance over to see if the windows could be opened. Windows, in this case, would alter into air-cooling things. If we wished to exit the room, then we would be drawn to the door, and if the handle was stuck, then suddenly our entire consciousness would become aware of the handle, and it would fill our mind so that we would separate from it as a subject and look upon it as an object. Now, what could cause us to become aware of the flower bin or the door handle to the point that we might actually separate from it and create a distinction between the subject, which is us, and the object, which is the bin or the door handle? The cause is a transition of the noticed and ungrayed, unready-to-hand aspect from the left hemisphere and FL. In our current example, we are talking about an empty flower bin, to an item in the right hemisphere, which we recall is the home of Locke the perceiver's object binding, and also the location for Descartes' separation of observer from raw sensory input. How does this transfer take place? Martin Heidegger speaks of it as deworlding. Let's examine the process. Before the problem emerged, CL absorbed coping or dealing was drawing data flow from FL downwards to CL. It was a direction that was compatible with feeling. However, CL absorbed coping or dealing with bread making has been interrupted by a flower bin that is unready to hand. CL, in response, prepares to take a stand on its being. This reverses the flow of information between CL and FL from what it normally is in feeling and its absorbed coping, and causes the thinking loop to take over. Whenever the thinking circuit operates, then some aspect within FL will stand out within the current context. This noticed essence, with its adverbial too scarce or not working aspect, is passed to perceiver strategy by means of ISTP. Perceiver analysis, we have suggested in previous episodes, is responsible for object binding, and it begins to process the associated information, and CR revises its plan in the light of the sudden CL focus. Now, why is it necessary for the information transfer to take place in this sort of a complex way? Why is it not sufficient for FL simply to point at an object and tell CR directly that a plan must be revised in order to meet some problem that is unready to hand? Why must the process be mediated by thinking and its powerful deductive logic and syllogistic machinery? In particular, why must the final stage of the transfer move through perceiver belief? I'll use an illustration that comes from Professor Hubert Dreyfus of the University of California in Berkeley. This scholar is one of the world's leading experts on the philosophy of Martin Heidegger. Let's imagine that we wish to give a lecture to 13 people, and we are assigned a classroom and told that there will be 13 chairs in the room. However, we walk in and we see that the chairs are in boxes, and that the lecture is about to begin. Are there 13 chairs? In the current context, no, there are not. Or let's suppose that the chairs have come from a local museum, and they have signs attached which state "Antique, do not use." Are there 13 chairs? What if some of the chairs are broken? Or what if chairs are present and the students walk in, and one of them weighs 350 pounds, and it is not certain that the chairs will tolerate this weight? Logic is evidently necessary, and in some cases this logic will need to be modified by aspects of belief. The mind, it turns out, is quite capable